Everyone thinks 11 versus the Mind Flayer would be wild. The biggest psychic force in the Upside Down against the girl who closed every gate it's ever opened. But when you really look at what the Mind Flayer is and what 11's become, it's not even close. The show has always made this fight look balanced. The Mind Flayer controls armies, creates monsters, and spreads like a virus across Hawkins. 11 struggles to keep up, pushing her powers to the limit. On the surface, it feels like the kind of match that could go either way. But the truth is, one of them is built to adapt, and the other can't exist without something else keeping it alive. Since the start, Stranger Things has hinted that the Mind Flayer isn't a creature, it's an idea, a system. A hive that doesn't create, only consumes. It grows stronger, it spreads wider. 11's power is similar. Every season she evolves. But her strength comes from connection, not control. From individuality, not assimilation. That difference decides everything. So when people ask who'd win in a straight fight, 11 or the Mind Flayer, they're asking the wrong question because 11's already beaten it, not once, but twice. Every time she's faced it, it's lost control, collapsed, or been cut off from our world entirely. And that's before she's even reached her full potential. In this video, we're breaking down exactly why that's the case, from what the Mind Flayer actually is, to how 11's powers work, and why their conflict was never equal to begin with. Once you see the full picture, you'll realize this was never a rivalry. It's an extinction event, and the Mind Flayer's on the wrong side of it. When people think of the Mind Flayer, they picture a monster, a towering shadow with long limbs moving through storms above Hawkins, but that image is only a projection. The Mind Flayer isn't just a creature, it's the shape the human mind gives to something far older and stranger, a consciousness from another dimension that doesn't live or die the way living things do. From what the show and the first shadow reveal, the Mind Flayer comes from Dimension X, a place that exists beyond the Upside Down. It's a world of red skies, storms of dust, and organic matter that moves as if it's alive. The Mind Flayer can't cross into our world on its own. When gates open between the two dimensions, they allow parts of the Mind Flayer's network to spread. Spores drift through, vines grow outward, and the red haze begins to fill the air. But without a gate, the Mind Flayer has no physical presence here. It can only extend its reach through what leaks across, and through what it can control. Control is its defining trait. When the Mind Flayer enters someone's mind, it doesn't just possess them, it rewires them. The possessed share one link, forming a hive where thoughts and senses flow in both directions. That's why Will can see through its eyes in Season 2. But control is also where its limits begin. The Mind Flayer doesn't create, it copies and consumes. Every creature we've seen serve it. The Demogorgons, the Flayed, even the spider-like form made of melted bodies, started as something else. The Mind Flayer reshaped them to fit its pattern. It doesn't build new life, it corrupts existing life into versions of itself. That's why everything under its control looks the same. Veins, tendrils, the same black dust spreading like infection. That infection spreads through connection points, biological or psychic. Once the link is cut, the control ends. We see this several times. When 11 closes the gate at the end of Season 2, every Demodog collapses. When the Russians briefly open another gate beneath Starcourt Mall, the network stirs again. But only because the barrier was reopened. The Mind Flayer doesn't invade, it leaks through cracks. This dependency defines its existence. The Mind Flayer depends on gates, on hosts, and on the physical laws of other worlds to spread. In its own dimension, it reigns without opposition, but outside of it, it's fragile. It needs intermediaries, people or creatures that can survive on both sides. That's why Vecna becomes so important later. He gives the Mind Flayer structure, purpose, and access to our world. Without him, it's just a drifting consciousness looking for an opening. The first shadow reinforces this idea. Long before the events of the series, the dimension already existed, full of red dust and organic terrain that moved on its own. Henry Creel didn't create it, he stumbled into it, but his mind made sense of it by shaping the dust into something that reflected him, the spider form that became the Mind Flayer's image. The real Mind Flayer has no face or body. The spider silhouette is Henry's interpretation, a design imposed on something abstract and endless. So what we call the Mind Flayer isn't a single being. It's a network of matter, energy, and intent that responds to will. Henry gave it direction. It gave him power. But even in that partnership, the balance is uneven. It needs someone to define it, to give it a form it can't create on its own. That dependency is its first and greatest weakness, a system that can't exist without someone else to translate its existence into something real. That's the Mind Flayer's true nature. A collective consciousness built on connection and consumption, ancient and vast but incomplete. It can fill skies, move through storms, and infect the minds of anyone who opens themselves to it. But it can't survive without the link. The moment that connection breaks, everything it's built collapses back into dust. To understand why the Mind Flayer never stood a chance, you have to look at where Eleven's power comes from and how it's changed. Because unlike the Mind Flayer, her strength doesn't depend on others, it grows through them. Eleven's power was born in control. From the start, she was raised to obey commands, to treat emotion as weakness, and to use her mind as a weapon. Hawkins' lab trained her to act like a machine, to push outwards, to break things, to hurt. But everything about her power was built on emotion, not obedience. Every major breakthrough she's ever had came from feeling, not force. That's what sets her apart from everything that comes out of the Upside Down. In Season 1, her power is raw instinct. She reacts to threats, often without understanding how she's doing it. By Season 2, she's learned to channel that instinct through intent. Closing the gate wasn't about rage or panic, it was about focus. She learned that her emotions are the source of her strength, not something to suppress. It's the first sign that she's starting to master what the Mind Flayer can't: self-control. Season 3 pushes that idea further. She starts experimenting with how her powers connect her to others. She can see across space, locate people through memories, and reach into the void, the black space that connects every mind. The more she grows emotionally, the stronger her reach becomes. When she loses her powers at the end of Season 3, it's not a setback, it's a reset. She has to relearn how to use her strength without relying on pain or anger. Season 4 shows what that evolution really means. When she returns to the Nina Project, we see her retrace her memories all the way back to her origin. The lab flashbacks reveal that her power wasn't created in a test tube, it was awakened. She was born with the ability to connect to the same psychic field that links every living thing. Brenner's experiments didn't make her powerful, they taught her how to push deeper into that field. He wanted control. She wanted understanding. That difference matters. The Mind Flayer uses connection as a weapon. It links minds to erase individuality. 11 uses connection to protect it. When she reaches into someone's mind, she doesn't overwrite them. She sees them. When she faces Billy at Starcourt, she doesn't try to control him. She reminds him of who he is. That's the clearest split between her and the Upside Down's influence. She restores what it consumes. The first shadow adds even more weight to this. It shows the earliest experiments with children like Henry Creel long before 11 was born. Henry can step into a psychic space where thoughts become physical and where reality responds to emotion. That same space, the mental void, is what 11 later uses to locate people. It's the same plane of existence where the gate first opened. It connects the human mind to the other dimension. 11's ability isn't separate from that. It's part of it. But where Henry let the power distort him, she learned to balance it. The play also reveals something subtle but important. The rift between worlds doesn't open from one side. It opens when someone with enough psychic strength pierces both realities at once. Henry did it out of hatred. 11 did it out of love and fear. They're both drawing on the same field, but for opposite reasons. Over time, her strength stops being about force altogether. By Season 4, she's not just throwing or closing things, she's rebuilding. She brings Max back from the edge of death by restoring the connection between body and mind. It's not something the lab could have trained her to do. It's a natural evolution of what her power always was, the ability to connect, heal, and restore what's been broken. What makes her power unique is that it's self-sustaining. She doesn't need gates or hosts. She doesn't drain from others, and she strengthens them. Every time she connects to someone, her awareness grows. Every time she heals, she understands more of what her gift can do. The Mind Flayer reaches outward endlessly, but it never evolves. 11 grows inward, and every time she does, she becomes something new. By the time Stranger Things reaches its final season, her power isn't about control at all. It's about harmony. She represents the human side of the psychic field, consciousness shaped by empathy instead of domination. That's what makes her a true opposite to the Mind Flayer. They both draw from the same source, but where the Mind Flayer corrupts connection, 11 uses it to restore balance. The Mind Flayer spreads to survive, 11 grows to live. When you line up 11 and the Mind Flayer, their powers look similar on the surface. Both can reach across space, both can enter minds, both can reshape reality in small ways. But those similarities disappear once you look closer. They may use the same energy, but the way they use it, and what they use it for, couldn't be more different. The Mind Flayer's entire existence revolves around extending its influence into other systems, people, animals, whole environments. It spreads like a virus, always outward, always seeking more to consume. The problem is, everything it touches becomes less stable. When it takes control of Will, his body temperature drops, his health collapses, and he starts to lose his sense of self. The more it spreads, the weaker its grip becomes on each individual piece. Its strength comes from scale, not precision. It can flood a world, but it can't focus. Eleven's power moves in the opposite direction. The more she focuses, the more power she draws. It's compact, directed, and deliberate. Every time she reaches into the void, she isolates what she's looking for and builds a connection around it. It's never random. Even in her most chaotic moments, there's control. When she closes the gate in Season 2, she doesn't destroy it by brute force. She seals it by targeting the link that holds it open. Her power doesn't spread, it sharpens. Another major difference is how each reacts to damage. The Mind Flayer has almost no adaptability. Once a gate closes, the part of its network on our side dies instantly. It can't rebuild or relocate itself without help. It relies on existing gateways or new ones opened by others. Its structure is enormous, but brittle. Every piece depends on the whole. Break one connection, and the chain reaction shuts down entire branches of its system. Eleven's system works the other way around. When she loses access to her power, like after the Battle of Starcourt, she isn't destroyed. She rebuilds. Her power is flexible because it's rooted in consciousness, not biology. She can lose it, relearn it, and evolve it. That's something the Mind Flayer can't do. It can change its environment, but it can't change itself. The same pattern appears in how they perceive others. The Mind Flayer sees individuality as a threat. The hive mind depends on everything thinking and acting the same way. Any free will in the system is a flaw. That's why when Billy begins to resist, even for a moment, the entire network starts to destabilize. Eleven's power depends on the opposite. Her strength increases through individuality. Every relationship she forms, with Mike, Hopper, or Max, gives her a stronger emotional foundation. The Mind Flayer becomes weaker the more it divides itself. 11 becomes stronger the more she connects. In terms of scale, the Mind Flayer looks more impressive. It covers skies, controls armies, and reshapes entire regions, but scale doesn't equal power. The Mind Flayer spreads thin because it has to. Its reach is the only thing keeping it alive. 11 doesn't need scale to win. She only needs contact. Once she makes that psychic connection, she can cut through any system no matter how big. We've seen that in every confrontation, from the Demogorgon to Vecna's psychic realm. Once she locks in, she doesn't miss. There's also intent. The Mind Flayer acts without empathy, but not without intelligence. It studies. It adapts its strategies through hosts like Billy or Henry, but those strategies aren't its own. It borrows minds to learn. 11 doesn't borrow anything. Her knowledge comes from experience. When she fights, she doesn't just react. She understands what she's fighting for. That's what gives her power direction, and that's something the Mind Flayer can't replicate. The deeper you compare them, the clearer it gets. One is a system, the other is a person. The Mind Flayer has reach but no focus. It has influence but no independence. It can't exist without the minds it consumes. 11's power, by contrast, is self-contained. It expands through will and emotion. She doesn't drain the world to survive. She restores it to balance. That's why this isn't a close fight. The Mind Flayer's strength depends on keeping its connections intact, while 11's strength depends on breaking them. Every time the two forces meet, she's operating on home ground. The psychic network that links all things. It's her natural environment. For the Mind Flayer, it's borrowed territory. Once she understands how to control that field fully, there's nothing the Mind Flayer can do. You can't outlast the source when you're only a shadow of it. Every fight between 11 and the Mind Flayer tells the same story. One side learns, the other repeats. Across 3 seasons, we watch the same pattern unfold. The Mind Flayer spreads, takes control, and tries to consume. 11 adapts, connects, and shuts it down. The difference is that she grows after every encounter. It doesn't. In Season 2, the Mind Flayer's first true attack begins with Will Byers. It enters his mind, not through force, but through vulnerability, through the echo of connection left from the first time he was taken. Once inside, it builds a tunnel between dimensions, spreading its network underneath Hawkins. Everything about this move shows how the Mind Flayer operates, indirectly, invisibly, and entirely, through others. It doesn't fight on its own. It uses human fear and memory as open doors. 11 at this point is still learning what her power can do. She spent most of the past season isolated, disconnected from everyone she cares about. But when she returns to Hawkins, that isolation becomes her advantage. She sees the problem from the outside. The tunnels, the fog, and the spreading infection are all symptoms of one thing: a connection that shouldn't exist. When she faces the gate, she's not fighting the Mind Flayer's body. She's closing off its only path into our world. That moment, when she seals the gate at Hawkins' lab, defines everything that comes next. She doesn't destroy the Mind Flayer, she isolates it. For something that exists only through connection, that's worse than death. It's cut off from its host network. That's why, when the gate closes, the flayed soldiers collapse instantly. It's the first time we see how dependent the Mind Flayer really is. 11 doesn't overpower it, she removes its foundation. Season 3 shows the Mind Flayer adapting, but not evolving. Cut off from the main gate, it rebuilds itself using what little remains of its presence in the real world. Dust particles merge with blood and bone to create the physical creature we see at Starcourt. It's massive, terrifying, and completely new in form. But at its core, it's still the same old system, a network of controlled hosts fused into one body. It doesn't change strategy, it just scales it up. This version of the Mind Flayer is all about fear. It wants 11 to see it, it wants her to know it can touch her world directly, and for a while, it works. She's injured, drained, and forced to retreat. But even when she loses her power, she wins the fight. The moment Billy breaks through its control, the Mind Flayer hesitates. It pauses. That second of resistance is all it takes for 11 and the others to destroy its body. Again, the pattern repeats. Connection broken, network collapse. It can't sustain itself once individuality pushes back. The Starcourt battle is also the first time 11 experiences total disconnection from her ability. Losing her power forces her to rediscover what drives it, and this is where the difference between her and the Mind Flayer becomes clearest. The Mind Flayer loses its connection and dies. 11 loses hers and grows. It's the only way she could have reached the next level we see in Season 4. By Season 4, the Mind Flayer isn't acting directly anymore. It's being guided, or rather, used, by Henry Creel, now fully transformed into Vecna. Henry gives the Mind Flayer something it never had: a hierarchy. He shapes its energy into structure, building a psychic empire inside the Upside Down. But in doing so, he reveals the Mind Flayer's biggest weakness. Without someone like him, it's just chaos. It's influence without intent. Henry supplies the plan, but the Mind Flayer supplies the raw power. Together they're dangerous, but still dependent. Meanwhile, 11's on the opposite trajectory. Season 4 takes her back to her origin point, and through that process, she reclaims everything that was taken from her. The Nina Project isn't just about regaining power, it's about understanding it. She relives her memories of Henry and sees what really happened the day the first gate opened. She realizes her power doesn't come from anger or control, it comes from empathy and resolve. That's what lets her tap into a deeper layer of the psychic field than ever before. When she finally re-enters the fight, not in person, but through the void to help Max, we see what true mastery looks like. 11 no longer needs proximity or visibility. She connects across dimensions, fights Vecna within his own psychic landscape, and nearly reverses death itself. That's something the Mind Flayer, even at full strength, could never do. Its influence ends when the link breaks. 11's begins there. Each battle follows the same equation. The Mind Flayer extends itself until the system breaks. 11 focuses until it restores. Season 2 proved she could shut it out. Season 3 proved she could resist it without her powers. Season 4 proved she could reach it anywhere. The Mind Flayer's greatest advantage, its network, is exactly what makes it vulnerable to someone like her. Because when every part of you is connected, one precise hit can end everything, even the first shadow. Supports this pattern, the play's events show the early experiments with psychic connection and the first human attempts to tap into the other dimension. The scientists saw power but ignored balance. So when you look back, there's no real competition here. Across every confrontation, the Mind Flayer repeats itself. Same method, same result. 11 adapts, rebuilds, and evolves. The more she understands herself, the less room there is for the Mind Flayer to exist. It's not just that she beats it, it's that her growth makes its kind of existence impossible. The Mind Flayer's power ends where hers begins. To really understand why 11 versus the Mind Flayer isn't close, you have to look beyond Hawkins. The story has never been just about monsters or psychic powers. It's about two competing systems, one that builds connections and one that consumes them. That conflict stretches across dimensions, and it starts long before 11 or Vecna ever existed. From what we've seen in Stranger Things and The First Shadow, Dimension X existed long before Henry Creel opened the first gate. It's not a mirror of our world, it's an origin point. Creatures there don't evolve through biology, they evolve through connection. The Mind Flayer is the best example of that. It isn't a being that grew, it's a shape formed by consciousness. A single will expressed through millions of linked fragments. When Henry Creel was sent through the rift, he entered a world that already had rules, and he learned how to exploit them. The Mind Flayer wasn't his creation, he discovered it. The particles he encountered weren't just dust, they were part of a massive psychic network that reacted to thought. When Henry made contact, the network shaped itself around him. It responded to his emotions, his hatred, and his sense of superiority. That's how the spider form was born. It was Henry's mind reflected back at him by the environment. He didn't build the Mind Flayer. He became its architect. Without Henry, the Mind Flayer has no focus. It can spread, but it can't direct itself. The network needs a center to hold it together, and Henry filled that role. The two represent opposite forces within the same system. The Mind Flayer feeds on expansion. Every mind it touches becomes another node in its network. 11 operates through focus. She channels her energy into a single point until everything else falls away. That's why her power scales upward while the Mind Flayer's plateaus. Its strength grows only when more minds are connected, but she can amplify her own without relying on anything external. The more she understands herself, the stronger she gets. Dimension X also gives us clues about why the Mind Flayer can't win. The creatures and particles there follow psychic direction. That means, if their leader falls, the entire system destabilizes. When 11 closed the gate in Season 2, she didn't just stop one monster, she disrupted an entire ecosystem that depended on a single signal. The Mind Flayer can't function without a link to the physical world. It needs an anchor. 11's ability to sever that link is fatal to it. Another key detail is how both forces manifest physically. The Mind Flayer can't exist here without building through others, through flesh, through infection, through psychic control. Its strength is always borrowed. 11's power doesn't need a host. It flows directly through her. That's what separates them at the most fundamental level. One is a parasite, the other is a conduit. If we think of the Upside Down as a corrupted copy of our world, then 11 represents the part of reality still capable of change. She's proof that the system can adapt. The Mind Flayer is the exact opposite, can only repeat. Every version of itself we've seen, from the shadow monster in Season 2 to the creature at Starcourt, has followed the same pattern: spread, consume, collapse. 11's pattern is the opposite: lose, recover, grow. All of this points to the same conclusion. The fight between 11 and the Mind Flayer was never just about power levels, it's about how the two systems they represent operate. The Mind Flayer depends on hierarchy and control. 11 depends on connection and will. The moment she severs its link to our world, it has no way to rebuild. Its world needs a mind to shape it. Hers stands on its own. That's the bigger picture. The Mind Flayer isn't a monster she has to outmuscle. It's a system she's designed to shut down. Every battle we've seen is a smaller version of that same process. Identify the connection, cut it off, restore balance. The Mind Flayer isn't her equal, it's her opposite, and opposites don't coexist. One stabilizes, the other corrupts. The story has always shown which side wins when you step back and look at the full story. Not just the fights, but the systems behind them. The outcome is clear. 11 and the Mind Flayer aren't competing on the same level. Their powers look similar on the surface, but they come from two different structures. One depends on control, the other depends on balance. And that difference decides everything. The Mind Flayer's strength comes from expansion. It spreads through others, through hosts, through fear, through the hive link that lets it see across dimensions. But that structure is also its weakness. It's only as strong as its network. Every victory it's ever had relied on another mind to do the work. In Season 2, it needed will to act as a bridge. In Season 3, it had to build a physical body out of dozens of people. Each time it needed more pieces just to stay connected. That's not independence, that's dependence scaled up. 11 works the opposite way. She doesn't spread her power, she condenses it. When she lifts a gate or seals a rift, she's drawing everything inward, focus instead of expansion. That kind of power can grow without limits because it doesn't rely on external control. It relies on clarity. Every time she's pushed to her limit, she's refined that focus. She doesn't gain strength by taking from others. She gains it by understanding herself. That's something the Mind Flayer can't copy. The Mind Flayer's other weakness is its nature. It doesn't create, it imitates. Every version of the Upside Down we've seen is frozen, static, trapped in repetition. It can't evolve without a guiding mind like Vecna to shape it. When 11 shut the gate, it wasn't just a battle victory, it was a structural failure for the Mind Flayer. Without that bridge, its hive can't function in our world. Its design requires a constant link. Remove the link, and the system collapses. That's why the idea of an even match between 11 and the Mind Flayer doesn't hold up. Power in Stranger Things isn't about raw energy, it's about control over connection. 11's power lets her control both sides of the gate. She can open and close them. She can project across planes of reality without losing herself. The Mind Flayer can only operate when the boundary is weak. It can't reach into her world unless she or someone else opens the door first. That's not a rivalry, that's a dependency. The story has been showing this pattern since Season 1. The Demogorgon hunted through a few tears in the wall. The Mind Flayer invaded only after the gate widened. Every escalation has one constant. The Upside Down's forces can't move without help. 11 doesn't need any. She's the only one who can affect both dimensions directly, which puts her in complete control of when and how the conflict happens. What makes this even clearer is how both forces respond to loss. The Mind Flayer can't adapt when it loses part of its network, it just tries to rebuild the same structure. 11 evolves. Every defeat, from losing her powers in Season 3 to rediscovering them in Season 4, changes how she uses them. She learns. It doesn't. The show's entire arc has been about that difference, the power of growth versus the trap of repetition. From a narrative point of view, the show has already answered who stands above the other. The Mind Flayer is a concept, a representation of domination, control, and fear. 11 is a person, capable of reflection, empathy, and choice. Those traits give her access to something the Mind Flayer will never have: direction. It reacts to emotion, she channels it. It copies form, she redefines it. Even in moments when she's physically overpowered, she still dictates the shape of the fight. That's why she's always the one who ends it. If you look at the first Shadow, this dynamic was built into the story from the start. The dimension that would become the Upside Down wasn't born evil. It was neutral. It reflected thought. The corruption came from Henry Creel's influence. That means 11's role isn't just to destroy the Mind Flayer, but to correct what Henry broke. Her powers don't cancel his, they counterbalance them. She represents the same system functioning the way it was meant to. That's why the Mind Flayer can't truly beat her. She's restoring the natural balance of a world that was twisted out of shape. Even if the Mind Flayer tried to evolve, even if it found another host or another form, it would still be bound by the same rule. It can't exist without connection. 11's ability to sever that link ends it every time. She doesn't have to destroy the creature physically. She only has to isolate it. That's been the consistent pattern. The gate closes, the network fails, and everything tied to it disintegrates. She's not fighting an enemy. She's fixing a malfunction. This is why 11 versus the Mind Flayer was never a fair fight. It's not a matchup of equal forces. It's the resolution of two incompatible systems. The Mind Flayer consumes everything until it collapses under its own weight. 11 integrates what's broken until it works again. One burns through power. The other channels it. The more pressure you apply, the clearer her strength becomes. The Mind Flayer can't adapt to that. It can't even understand it. Even thematically, the show aligns with this. Stranger Things has always been about found family, empathy, and the strength of human connection. The Mind Flayer stands for the opposite: isolation, control, and fear of loss. Every victory 11 has comes from reconnecting with someone else, whether it's Hopper, Mike, or her own sense of identity. Every defeat the Mind Flayer suffers comes from that same kind of unity. It's not an accident, it's built into the story's moral structure. Power built on empathy outlasts power built on domination. So when people say the final battle will be close, they're missing the point. The stakes will be high, but the balance isn't even. 11's abilities have outgrown the Mind Flayer's system. She doesn't fight on its terms anymore. She controls the boundary it needs to survive. That alone makes the difference absolute. At its core, this story was never about who's stronger. It's about who understands the system they're part of. The Mind Flayer uses power to expand control, 11 uses it to restore balance, 1 consumes connection, the other sustains it. That's the foundation of everything we've seen. And when those two forces meet, there's only one possible outcome. The Mind Flayer's world collapses, 11's remains. That's why 11 versus the Mind Flayer isn't even close.